You don't know what you don't know. How to plan and build your career as an ambitious person. Today we want to go through this full course, and I want everyone who is aiming extremely high in their careers to give you a complete guide and a very strategic way to construct a master plan for your career and also your life. And this is probably something for the 0.1%. This is not for everyone. But if you go through this and if you go through the effort to build a master plan for yourself, and you're going to learn today how that works, then you're very far ahead of most of your benchmark competition. So what we're going to talk about is very shortly my background, then how to create a vision and a master plan for your life, how to choose what to study, if at all, how to get any job you want, so how to select a university, should you do an MBA or not, how to get good grades, how to do the right internships, how to do extracurriculars, so for example start a small side venture or start a student club, something like that. Then we want to deep dive into a couple of the professions that I think have a high potential of making you extremely wealthy and successful, and usually serve as the foundation of a strong career. Those are investment banking, consulting, PE, VC, big tech, and startup. We're going to dive into all of these and their pros and cons. Next up, how to reach a net worth of $1 million before 30 or 35, depending on how old you are at this very moment. So we're going to talk about careers, side businesses, investing, fitness specialization, geo-diversification and networking, and lastly, how to become a billionaire and the best industries to work in the long term. So we have a lot of ground to cover. Let's jump right into it. First of all, a little bit of a disclaimer. I would have certainly done some things differently. If I jump back, let's say 15 years or so, I was completely clueless. There would have been things that I could have optimized for sure, but at this point I didn't know what I didn't know, so I didn't know that before going into university I could have already done a couple of small internships here and there. I didn't know that it's possible when you're 18, 19, 20 to already start a business. I didn't know what's the process. I didn't know what things I could have done in parallel to my school, to my university, to my internships, how to max all of this out. And then I also didn't know how to properly think about career progression. So what's the first job I should take? What's the second, the third? What doors open and which other doors close when I take a certain job? In the end, it all kind of worked out pretty well, but or so far. But certainly things that I could have optimized. So having a master plan for your career and for your life in general is the number one thing that will set you apart from 99% of the population. If you ask anyone outside, they probably don't have this kind of master plan, which is a big mistake. Some people are just blessed with, parents or relatives that guide them. They have an uncle who works in investment banking or who started a very successful company. So they get this kind of advice for free and at the dinner table. But most people don't. And then you have a couple of services out there, career services that will guide you. But most of them are pretty costly. So not everyone can afford that. So this is really completely free. There's no nothing attached to it. Just trying to level the playing field here, okay? So that also means that your chances of getting to a high net worth, they decrease drastically if you don't have a career master plan. It's just that important to have this kind of strategic plan for where you want to go, what you want to reach. And obviously the sooner you start, the better. So after this video, there's no more excuse that you don't know how to plan the next steps in your life. And lastly, also a bit of a important remark there. This is not just for business students. We are talking about business careers, yes, in the widest sense. So this is not for, people that want to work in medicine their whole life. Probably not enough valuable advice in this video for you. But this is for people who see themselves in the business domain in some shape or form. They want to work at a business, they want to start a business, and so on. So even if you're not studying business, this is still quite valuable for you. Now let's talk about my background very shortly. Who's your host today? Kevin, that's me. So I build and invest in technology companies across Europe and China, mostly focused on fintech, Web3/crypto, and creator economy with my investments and my portfolio. In the past, I also worked a lot with companies and helped them to penetrate the Chinese market, either as an angel investor, so I was invested in these companies, or simply as a service that I sold to these companies. Let's highlight a couple of things that are maybe important for this very talk. I'm a guest lecturer at a couple of universities, so I do talk about topics like this quite often in front of many ambitious students. I'm part of a couple of MBA programs where I teach and serve as a guest lecturer. So I know kind of the typical questions that usually come up in this context. And then in the past, I also worked at a lot of very traditional high performance career companies myself. So I used to work in management consulting. I also had a short stint in banking, worked at a big venture incubation company / VC, and of course active as a founder myself. When I'm not working, then I'm working out usually. So how to create a vision and a master plan for your life. That's really very important, let's say, message for you right at the beginning of this presentation. So having a well-articulated vision and master plan for your career, as we already know, is going to get you ahead of 99% of your benchmark. Now, how do you go about setting such a vision and master plan? What I always advocate for doing is first set a 10-year vision. And think about this 10-year vision as something that's a little bit abstract, So you're not going to know if in 10 years you work as a senior vice president or you work as CEO, CFO. It's very difficult to predict these kind of things. But what I want you to do is sit down and think about where are you going to be roughly in 10 years. And that includes your personal situation. So what country are you going to live in? Or is it going to be multiple countries? You're going to be, oscillating between multiple cities, have multiple apartments. Are you married or not? How much time do you want to spend working at this point in your life? And so all of these are important questions, but also, of course, think about the business side of things. So some big things you should be able to answer is, in 10 years, are you employed or not? Do you work for yourself, or do you have your own big business with, thousands of people, which of course also means a lot of responsibility for you? Are you aiming for a net worth of 1 million, 50 million, 5 billion? Where do you see yourself roughly? So these are the things we try to answer for the 10-year vision. And then what we do is we break it down, okay? So you have your 10-year vision and you break it down in 3 times 3-year visions, okay? So roughly 10 years, if you put these 3 blocks together and you ask yourself, okay, I know my 10-year vision for the next 3 years. What do I need to do in order to get a big step closer to that? Okay, so for your 3 years, for the next 3 years, you can already plan much more in a much more granular way. So you can think about, if you're right now studying, okay, when are you going to finish your studies? What should be the first job, that really sets you up for that 10-year vision that you're trying to achieve, and so on. So you can go a little bit more granular. And then, obviously, some of you might have guessed it, what you do is you take that 3-year vision, you break it down into 1-year increments. So you ask yourself, okay, knowing my 10-year vision, my 3-year vision, what do I need to do in the next 12 months in order to get there? So essentially you go from macro to micro, and let's substantiate that a little bit throughout the next couple of slides. So I often often when I talk with people about that, and they tell me, I don't really know what my vision is, 10 years, where I'm going to be in the next 10 years. That seems so far away. How the hell am I supposed to know where I'll be? And the thing is, you need to start thinking about that. And what I suggest is you really block a weekend, or you block, a Saturday. You sit down, you have a nice cup of tea or whiskey or whatever gets you off, and you take a notebook and you start, writing down ideas of how you see yourself in the future. I really think about it in a very broad way. So you should have answers for, are you in a relationship? Are you married? Kids? All these kind of things. That's kind of important to, consider in your long-term trajectory. Are you employed or not? Are you an entrepreneur or not? Do you have 5 employees? Do you have 5,000? Where is your net worth, more or less? Are you traveling a lot, or are you more stationary, multiple apartments across the globe, or just one big house with Wi-Fi and that's it? These things I want you to note down, and there's no wrong or right, but there's just a snapshot of what you are envisioning right now for yourself. What I said here is I like to also here start from the macro, right? Start from these big questions around your personal situation, kids, marriage, and so on, and then kind of narrow it down, go more into this career area. Think about what industry would you like to work in, or what are the 5 industries, or maybe you don't even know that, but at least you can say, okay, these industries I don't want to work at, tobacco industry, oil and gas, super boring. I never want to work there. So just write that down. It's also nice. And maybe one session is not enough, so maybe you'll realize, okay, I've spent my whole Saturday thinking about that, and it seems like I didn't get any step further. Trust me, you did. And if you try the same exercise next week again, there'll be a little bit more clarity in your thinking. So that's what I would do, and that's what I did, in fact, now around 10 years ago. So we're actually, for me it's funny, because right now, me recording this video, I'm at the end of my first 10-year cycle. It's crazy to think about it. It always seemed like, that's an eternity, but it's not. It comes much faster than you think. So that's that. Now what you can do is, once you narrowed that down, okay, so we now jumped to the basically 1 and 3 year plan. So you have your 10-year plan. I already said you narrow that down. Think about what are the 3-year, what is the 3-year vision based on your 10-year vision, and what is the 1-year vision. Well, what I want you to do is then kind of put these things into an action plan, into a timeline, a Gantt chart like this one. So it's a little bit more of a visual help for you, and helps you to, visualize things. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg, okay? So let's think about, you have this Gantt chart, and okay, like, first I want to finish my studies, I need to do 2 or 3 more internships, then I want to build a side business in the area of SaaS, then next I want to start this as a first job, blah, blah, blah. You have that. That's just the tip of the iceberg. The important thing now is to act upon it, okay? And that's usually going to be through setting milestones, having weekly goals, holding yourself accountable in some way. Some people need a mentor to do that. Some people are able to push themselves. So Whatever works for you, you need to find out, because just having this stuff on paper is worth zero. Okay, you need to act upon that. So I'm a big fan, for example, of working with my calendar. I put almost everything into my calendar. If I know, I had this goal to get better at Chinese last year, for example. So I blocked time in my calendar to study Chinese. I remember every Saturday morning I had a time blocker to search, to discover new words in Chinese, put them into my vocabulary learning app, and study them. And then I had every noon, when I did my break from work, I also repeated vocabulary. So you need to, for me, that worked in that way. Other people use, Notion or Evernote or other tools. Whatever works for you is fine. Okay. And now that you have this vision and this master plan, let's say this Gantt chart, that's just a snapshot of where you want to go. It's no crime if this changes. Okay, so if what I did, actually, I also use Evernote a lot, so I can go back and look at master plans that I created 6 years ago. They are completely different in some regard than my master plan right now. Okay, so this is going to change. Maybe this year you think, okay, I want to start a big career in investment banking, and as part of that, one of my next steps in my master plan is doing an internship in investment banking. Now, maybe in 6 months you did your first internship. Guess what? You realize you hate it. So you need to adapt your master plan. The nice thing though is you can go back and look at, let's say in 10 years, you look back at your first master plan you created. You'll be amazed how things have changed, And it's also something to keep yourself accountable, because with age, we become more realistic. And that's good in some ways. It kind of helps us to function well in this society and take on responsibility. But it's also extremely dangerous for people that aim high. Because if you tell someone today you want to become a billionaire, you want to be one of the most successful people in the world, you want to be the next Elon Musk, people tell you that's crazy. There's not a single person that will tell you go for it. And what I see very often is that people, I used to hang out with when I was 17, 18, 19, they had these big dreams. And then every year we met and they scaled back their dreams because they became more realistic. And having a master plan, building a master plan very early in life, shows you what dreams you had at some point in your life, and that you might have given up on a couple of them. So the message is to stay extremely childish, keep these dreams that you had when you were very young, and don't become more realistic. Say, oh, what if it doesn't work and the probability is so small? Yeah, what the hell? What's the problem? Of course it's small. That's why not everybody's gonna make it. So stay childish, aim for the stars, hold yourself accountable, and look at these master plans you did in the past and ask yourself, are you becoming too realistic? Are you aiming too low? If yes, that's a bad sign. If I look at my master plans 10 years ago, they were freaking megalomaniacal. They still are until this day. How to choose what to study, if at all. So that's of course the first step. Okay, some of you might be very young. If you're 16, 17, you're not studying yet. Some of you are at the study stage, and some of you are beyond that. So for you, the only thing that's possible is some online studies that you might do on top of what you already did, or doing something like an MBA. Now, first of all, to the question, should you study or not? essentially that's you weighing risk. So this is having a safety cushion versus taking a risk and going all in. For myself, I would always prefer having a small safety cushion, because in today's world, having studied something means a lot to a lot of employers. So especially if you're not coming from a very, wealthy background, and people uh, can provide for safety, financial safety cushion for you if you fall. It makes sense to have something like that, to have studied something and at least be able to do a job that pays 30, 40, 50K per year if things don't work out at all. Now, that's not the only reason. For me personally, I think studying is a great time to explore, to go into different directions, do a lot of different internships, all the while gathering a lot of knowledge in a domain that you're hopefully passionate about. There's no better place to network and build this initial network that will probably take you very far in your career than a university. So those were all the reasons why I always knew I wanted to study, and I wanted to take these studies seriously and not see them about, drinks, having fun with girls or whatever, but about exploring and starting to build a strong foundation that I will be able to build a skyscraper on. Now, there are some people who have brilliant startup ideas, right? There's famously people like Mark Zuckerberg who dropped out of college and then decided to pursue their companies. Um, that's a decision you need to take in the moment. You need to weigh the opportunity cost of each decision. But from the outset, when you ask me about the average person, should you study or not? I think so, yeah. Now, there's a lot of people out there who will tell you, don't study and, go all in, become an entrepreneur. I mean, that's a popular opinion to have, and that kind of sounds cool. To me, it doesn't really resonate. And looking at the facts, the benefits of these studies, um, shows me that it's a good thing to study. Now, sometimes you need to be a little bit cautious about the monetary side of things. I do understand the argument that, for example, in the US, at some universities, I mean, you put yourself into debt, into extremely high debt. Now, those are things you need to navigate somehow. Here in Europe, we are lucky to just pay a couple of $100 per year for a university. I mean, that's a brilliant benefit we have. So if you're in the US, okay, you need to think about what are your options. Do you want to take on this debt? Do you want to go to another country? But from the outside, generally I would advocate for studying for the reasons that I just mentioned. Now, what should you study is of course the next big question, and the answer is it doesn't really matter as long as it's not some of the no-go subjects, and it is something that you are reasonably passionate about, or at least you will be able to become one of the top students. Now, many people don't have a passion, It's not like they come out of school and they're like, oh, I love math, I want to study math, or I love business. That's for sure the one thing I want to study. Most people don't really have that. So I understand it might be difficult to, to find a subject to study just based on your passion. So that's why ask yourself where you can do reasonably well, And the way you can do that is you go to different university websites, you look at the course material, and you start getting into it a little bit. Also YouTube. I mean, there's so many. If you type in mechanical engineering, economics, and so on, you'll get lessons over lessons from people explaining for students who are studying for these subjects. And then ask yourself, can you kind of get into that? Do you see yourself doing that, or is it something that really you would struggle heavily and probably be in the bottom 50% of graduates. Now, how can we cluster these study subjects? In general, I would say you have generalists, sophisticated generalists, as I like to call them, and specialists. Okay, so generalists to me is business or economics, management. I mean that nowadays they have so many fancy name for something that's essentially business administration studies. Okay, some call it international management, whatever. Um, you're an extreme generalist if you do that. Same with law. What about sophisticated generalists? Those are subjects like math, computer science, engineering, physics that have become en vogue within the past couple of years, and big companies like investment banks, for example, started hiring from these talent pools, even though the people from these talent pools are not going to do anything that has to do with physics, for example, at the investment bank. Nevertheless, these study subjects are being regarded as subjects that teach you a certain way of thinking that will be helpful for what you will be doing in this job, investment banking, for example, or consulting for that matter. And then you have specialists. I mean, these people are specialists, and this really, architecture, medicine, psychology, you can do something in let's say you have a chance. There's always a possibility to go into, let's say, private equity, venture capital, or something as an architect. It's just extremely untypical, okay? And you will really need to work towards that very actively. Whereas if you're a math major, okay, I mean, every investment bank is looking for you. Same with private equity, venture capital. They just love you, okay? Now, within those, of course, there's so many differences here, right? Psychology, engineering, law, those are completely different worlds. Again, what I would suggest is you look at these course materials, and you also look at the people that are studying these things. Nowadays, we are blessed with tools like LinkedIn, so it's extremely easy to go online, check LinkedIn, see who's studying that kind of stuff. How do they look like, and what internships did they do? Does that sound fun to you, or just something that you don't really want to do? And then go from there. Now, what subjects should you avoid? There's a couple of subjects that teach you things that really don't have any exit potential. So a lot of these social science, unfortunately, it's a lot of these social subjects that are going to teach you great things, but you don't see anyone getting a great job with these kind of subjects. So that's why what I would do is I would always see, first of all, you can ask the university. The university is very vocal typically about what exit options you have with a given subject that you'll study at this university. And then also check for yourself, talk to the people studying there, check LinkedIn, see where did the people studying this 3 years ago, where did they end up? So in most of the top jobs that we're thinking about, whether you want to work in banking, or you want to go into private equity, or you want to start something on your own, you will need some kind of business knowledge. But that shouldn't really, make you study business or economics or management. If you study computer science and you have literally no clue about business knowledge, trust me, you'll be able to acquire that knowledge within a time frame of a couple of weeks. For example, if you start at a company like JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley, they have specific crash courses, they have boot camps that they put you through as a non-business major that will teach you all this kind of stuff, like how to calculate an IRR, how to do a DCF, and so on, within a couple of weeks. And typically, if you get through a study subject, like math or engineering, you're also able to cope with these business concepts. So That's the long story of what you should study. So there is really just four factors that will decide about whether or not you'll get your dream job. And of course, there's a couple of soft factors too, but the four main factors are the university. What name of the university? How prestigious is it? What's the rank of the university? The grades, how well did you perform during your studies? The internships you did during your studies, and the extracurriculars. What did you do on the side? Okay, and then there's a couple of software factors too that we'll talk about in a bit. Now, soft factors could be something like networking. Did you do well in terms of networking your way through university? And of course, at some point you also need to nail the interviews. But first, let's talk a little bit about networking. The most common question that I get is, I'm just a student, or I'm a very young guy at the beginning of my career. How the hell am I supposed to network, provide value to my networking target, right? Because that's what people always say, provide value. Now, of course you can provide value. The value that you provide is you are very young, you know your demographic, and you have a lot of time. And people who are, let's say, 50, 60, most of the times, these are the people you do want to network with, because they are at a point in their career where they are thinking about giving back, where they don't work as hard as they probably did in their 30s and 40s, where also they might have kids, but they already grew up. So when you're 50, 60, you kind of scale back and you think about, okay, what are some ways that I can give back? These are the perfect networking targets. At the same time, these people are so old that they don't understand what's going on in the 20, 30-year-old demographic anymore. So you can help them with that. You are at a university, you can access students, you can access professors, you can go into different lectures and can, have people fill out surveys about something. You can volunteer to, do certain tasks, certain research tasks, for example. And all of these things are extremely appreciated by people who don't have the time and don't have the network in this young demographic. When you network, leverage social media. So again, LinkedIn is such a great tool to just go online, see who are people at a certain age in a certain industry that I'm interested in, and try to just, contact them. This is also a game of numbers. So if you contact 100 people, for sure 10 or 15 of those will reply, and they will probably, this will lead to something. But if you just text 10 people, then you're very unlucky. 10 of them will not reply even, or one of them will tell you, sorry, not interested. Then, you go home depressed and don't get a mentor. It is a game of numbers, so do make sure to put in the effort to reach out to a high enough amount of people. Now, next up, of course, we need to nail the interviews, but we will discuss that later, how to nail the interviews in these different kind of industries that you might be interested in. Okay, so first step, we know, okay, these are of the four factors that matter: the university, the grades, the internships, and the extracurriculars. How do we go about getting these four factors right? How to select a university, and should you do an MBA, yes or no? We'll talk about that also. There are such things as university rankings, so check those. Okay, you want to know if your university is ranked high or low. When I started my studies at University of Mannheim, I knew this is the university that's consecutively been ranked for so many years number one place to study business administration in Germany, sometimes also in Europe. So I was kind of reasonably sure that if I go there, okay, I might be able to get a job. There's such things as target universities. I didn't know that when I was 18 and applying to universities. But there's target universities for certain industries. So private equity, funds might only hire from 3, 4, 5 different universities in a country. Same with investment banks and consulting firms. They reach out to these universities, they do events there, and they try to secure talent from these universities. If you go to a different university than that, that doesn't mean that you have no chance of ever getting into your dream job, but it makes it significantly harder. So why not check first if this university that you're applying to is a target university or not. You can just Google that and you'll find it. Pretty sure there's forums such as Wall Street Oasis. These guys just obsess about finding the right universities in order to get into finance jobs, for example. Same trick, check the LinkedIn profiles of graduates. So go online, see this person studied at Harvard University. Okay, what kind of job did he or she get? Extremely easy trick, and you can apply that in so many instances when building your career. Talk to people also. Actually drive up to the university if you have the possibility, if it's not in a different country. Drive there and just be on campus for one day, talk to some students, try to get a feeling for how you like it there. And also be aware of the differences between private and public universities. Especially in Europe, if you go to a public university, most of the times it's extremely cheap. But cheap doesn't mean worse. There's many private universities that don't offer the value that a public university would give you in Europe, for example. So get a feeling for that. Sometimes if you go to a private university, what you're really buying is a network, a network of firms that are in some way sponsoring this university or doing business with this university. So you, as someone paying tuition fees that are extremely high for this private institution, you kind of buy into this network, and you know reasonably well that you're going to get a job after you graduate from this private university. And then lastly, apply to multiple universities. Give yourself some optionality. It's extremely important to be able to choose from something. So you should not just go for this one because that's your favorite, but give yourself a little bit of optionality in case your priority A does not work. Should you do an MBA or not? Well, this depends on a lot of factors. There's a lot of different life situations where an MBA makes sense, and then there's others where it doesn't make any sense at all. Typically people do that at some point later in their careers, when they're, let's say, 20, 26, 27, 28 and older, up to 35 or something like that. People decide to do an MBA. For me, the questions that I ask in order to figure out if I want to do an MBA is, first of all, did you study something that was business related or not? If you studied something that's not business related and you never did anything management related in your job, could already be a good idea to do an MBA in order to get the feeling for that. If you did study something business related, doesn't mean an MBA has no value. An MBA gives you a lot of prestige if you do it at one of the top universities. It also gives you network. These are the two main reasons, I would say. Then of course you learn a little bit, but you can neglect that sometimes. And it gives you time to try something else, right? It gives you kind of a year or 2 years of not being in the workforce and just being able to be a student again. So a second question I ask is, do you want to pivot your career? Sometimes you have these cases of people who start in one career area and then they want to switch to something else. They started in consulting, have done that for a reasonable number of years, and now they want to switch into investment banking, and it didn't work. They applied to a couple of investment banks, nobody took them. So then it might be a good idea to do an MBA, do an MBA internship at an investment bank, and then apply again, and then usually it will work. And lastly, do you need to add some prestige to your CV? As I said, that's one of the main reasons people go into MBAs in order to have a great name on their CV. Um, and that leads to another piece of recommendation is only do MBAs at top business schools. It doesn't make sense to pay so much money for a business school that nobody has ever heard of. So I would aim for Howard, Stanford, Wharton, or at least, equivalents, Ivy League equivalents in different countries, so something like INSEAD, or if we talk about Ivy League, something like Columbia. People just know these kind of names, and yes, you pay a little bit more, but at least you have a name on your CV that people will recognize. For me personally, I'm obviously also in this age bracket where it kind of could make sense to think about an MBA, and I did think about it a lot. The funny thing is, or the luxurious position I have is, it doesn't make any sense. It's going too well. An MBA is also always something that, if it's not going the way you like, then okay, put an MBA on top, give yourself 1 or 2 years to reorient yourself, do a new, like make a new game plan, and then start working again. For me, kind of everything just worked the way I wanted it to work over the past couple of years, and putting or doing an MBA would kind of set me back, because there's a lot of other opportunities I can work on right now. But maybe in the future, if I feel the urge to go back to a university and kind of take some time out, I might consider an MBA again. Of course, then I would need to get into a top MBA business school, which is not easy. How to get good grades, right? So now we chose the university. Now you're at the university, you need to get good grades. Well, essentially, I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. I'm going to be extremely frank. I did well, I would say. So I was kind of in the top couple of percent, but I was never, top 5% or something like that at my university. My strengths were always doing a lot of other things on the side, building businesses, doing some great internships, but getting good grades was not. However, there's so many resources around that, so you'll easily find resources online. YouTube, there's hundreds, so just Google that. There's very sophisticated learning methods, so it's easy to get up on speed. One thing though, some words of caution, and that's also something I would have liked to know when I started out my journey, is university is not school anymore. There's this funny anecdote where a professor, I think it was even at our university, asked people in their first lecture, when they first came into the university, asked them, who of you was in the top 10% of his class at school? And kind of everybody raised their hands, and everybody's looking around. All right, this is a different playing field, okay? Especially if you're at one of these very selective universities. It's the top of the top. So what do you think? You're just going to, continue learning, studying the way you did back in the days, back in school? No, now it's a different kind of competition, and you have a normal, usually universities have this grading system where they try to put you into a normal distribution. So there is going to be, most of the people are going to be average, and then just a couple of people who do extremely well are going to be at the right end of the normal distribution. How to do the right internships. This is also something people usually have no clue about when they construct their career master plans. It does matter a lot what kind of internships you do in order to get into the jobs you're aiming for. I always say you should aim for 3 to 5 internships over the course of 3 years. If you're studying 3 years, do 3 to 5 internships. I did 6 and it didn't hurt me at all. You can study hard during your semester and then do internships during your semester breaks, no problem. Ideally, you keep these internships to, let's say, 3 to 6 months. I think 3 months is the ideal duration because it allows you to get a good overview of what's going on in the company. And it doesn't, and it still allows you to do a lot of other internships. Whereas if it's half a year, that's already, quite a long time. Anything more than half a year is just plain too long. And anything like 1 month internship, okay, this is kind of, it's a little bit of a joke. It's nice to get to know the people, but you're in and basically you're out again. Now, the goal during an internship generally is to, first of all, learn, right? It's a completely new industry for you, completely new company. You're going to have a lot of great learnings. Network, get to know as many people as possible, plus the people who might be able to, help you and advance your career in the future, and land an offer. So ideally, you should go out of that company and these people should tell you, hey, Mr. Kevin, if you need a job, so once you graduate, please knock on our door. We're happy to give you an offer. This gives you some kind of security because it tells you, okay, I already have this, maybe even if it's not your dream company, I already have this secured. It's good. And at the same time, gives you some great optionality. Again, this one point, check the LinkedIn profiles is again one of the best hacks you can do if you know you want to get into investment banking. Let's say you want to go to Goldman Sachs, check a couple of profiles of people who are currently working at Goldman Sachs. They have all their internships out there, so you see exactly what's possible. Make an Excel list, write down all the internships these guys and girls did, and then okay, that's my option pool. These are the internships I can do. If I do them, I'll be able at least to get a shot in the interviews. What should be my first internship? It's a very common question I get from a lot of young students who are starting out. And my favorite option is to work at a startup. Okay, your first internship you're likely going to do either before you start your studies or let's say half a year in. At this point, really, you don't know anything. I mean, you're not a help to anyone. Okay, so it's going to be very difficult to score, at least if you don't have a great network or your daddy's working as a managing director, to score an internship in banking, private equity, venture capital, and so on. They usually don't take you at this early stage. So who is going to take you? It's startups, and they are very, very thankful for any help they can get. Plus, it's probably the internship you're going to learn at the most, because startups are so dynamic. You have so many options to work, different departments. You're going to work with the CEO directly in many cases. So startup internships are really my favorite as a first thing to do. What should be my last internship? Usually that should be at the company that you want to work at. Let's say you want to work at BCG at some point. Try to get an internship at BCG. Secure the offer, tell them I'm going to do 3 months of traveling in Southeast Asia and I'm going to come back to work here full time. That's of course the ideal thing to do. But I'll give a little bit more guidance later in the presentation on this subject too. How to do extracurriculars. This one's an interesting one. Now, most people get their grades right, they get the university right, and they get the internships right. Few people do great extracurriculars. And this is a great opportunity to separate yourself from the rest. Firms like McKinsey, they love this kind of shit, okay? They love to see, okay, this guy, he was an Olympic fencer or famous martial artist before he started studying math and computer science, So this kind of virtue signaling is important actually. And there's a lot of very practical ideas that you can do on the side that will look great on your CV, but also benefit yourself greatly. For example, start a student club. I started a student club that was concerned with bringing the topic of entrepreneurship into our university, because our university, as I told you, is a target university for consulting and investment banks. So there was not a lot of people who were, into entrepreneurship. So we said, why don't we invite some VCs? Why don't we invite a guy from Google to tell us what are the, you know, interesting technologies that they're working on. I started that with two other partners, and it was a great journey. It is still in existence until this day. You can do similar things. You can start a consulting student club. You can start a student club where you just play chess every Thursday. It's also possible. It just shows that you show some initiative. You could join and lead a charity. Why do I say lead? Because many people join a charity, but they just do it on paper and then they don't do anything. One great example is Rotaract. That's the youth organization of Rotary, and they do great things. They organize a run where people run and then they collect donations. They do something like, they get clothes from people, collect their old clothes, ship them to Africa or something like that. Those are all cool things you can do on the side. Learn something, get to know other people who are, in most of the cases, very ambitious young fellas, and might be helpful during the further course of your career. Build something for your university. I know I created like a student board, so you could basically sell your stuff, like eBay, just for a university. That kind of wasn't too successful, but it kind of worked a little bit for some time. You can do that. You can do other things, like some kind of chat rooms for your university, ways for people to connect with each other. And then lastly, you can also participate in a political organization. Just make sure it's a moderate one, and you're not, going extremely far left or far right. Lastly, for these things, it's completely okay to make money, but I wouldn't emphasize it. So if you start a student club and there's some kind of fee that you take for people to be part of it, on your CV, don't make it about that, right? Obviously, these things are more to show that you are a builder, you are an initiator, you are a leader, instead of you are a rainmaker. Now, let's talk about investment banking, consulting, PE, VC, big tech, and startup. This is probably the knowledge that most people lack the most. So they get into these careers, or they get into university, and they have no idea what's out there, what are the possibilities. And me too, when I was young, I didn't know that there's private equity, and then there's something else that's called investment banking, and those are completely separate worlds. So what I want to give you is a little bit of a primer here. You can go much deeper into all of these professions. We're gonna talk about what is the required internship path. What does the interview process look like? What do you do there as a rookie? So you're not going to be a managing director there. So what do you do as a beginner? What do you learn? What lifestyle you live? What's the pay, the exit opportunities? And be aware of the fact that these are just the first stepping stones to a high net worth. So I wouldn't stay in consulting forever, for example, if I'm aiming for an extremely high net worth. But these are first extremely important stepping stones to getting to a high net worth. Let's look at investment banking. What's the required internship path to get into, let's say, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley? Usually you would start at a tier 3 investment bank, then next internship at a tier 2 bank, next in bulge bracket, so something like Credit Suisse, Citi, UBS, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, and so on. These are all considered bulge bracket banks, so it's kind of like the Ivy League of investment banks. What also works well, or what investment banks also recruiters like to see on your CV, is private equity, hedge funds, venture capital, consulting. Um, these are all things that absolutely don't hurt. So you could also do, let's say, an internship at a tier 3 investment bank, then work at a private equity, then do an internship at a private equity fund, then bulge bracket, and then to your dream firm secure the full-time offer. The interview process, usually a lot of brain teasers. How many bowling balls do you fit into an A380 Airbus? Um, you need to know a lot of financial concepts. So people are going to ask you things like, okay, can you just explain the CAPM to me? Walk me through an analysis. Walk me through a DCF of company XYZ. And then lastly, of course, personal fit. That's something we're going to have for all of these jobs. Personal fit is, how do people like you? Do you vibe with them? Are you a bit awkward socially? These are things that also do count. Preparation will usually last a couple of weeks. And what do you do as a rookie? There's something, it's a bit of a joke, it's called spreading comps, but it's very real. You basically look for different comparables of firms, so you compare their ratios on a different, price earnings ratio is like the thing that most people are aware of. So essentially you assemble a lot of data from various databases, you pack it into a nice looking Excel modeling a lot, building one pagers about different industries, about different companies. And there's also always going to be a couple of dull tasks like printing out a pitch book, making it look very sexy and taking it to the client side or something like that. Essentially, investment banking, you do a little bit more in Excel, a little bit less in PowerPoint than you would do in consulting. What do you learn? Diligence, zero defect, as we call it. Financial concepts, obviously. You also learn structure and proper communication with executives, how to navigate a hierarchical environment. Many of these investment banks, even though they might pretend like they have flat hierarchies, are extremely hierarchical environments. And the clients they work with most of the time are also not startups or something. They are also very hierarchical. So you learn how to navigate that, how to craft an email that kind of fits this environment. What's the lifestyle you live? You work from the office most of the time. Very few people have a lot of travel. And it's probably within this list the one where you work the most. So working 80 hours is not uncommon. Of course, you also work on the weekends then. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get to 80 hours from Monday to Friday. The pay comparably is the highest, 150K US dollars. If you're in Europe, you need to discount that heavily. It's probably going to be like 100K. And the exit opportunities are typically in private equity, hedge funds, start a startup, or into the industry, work at whatever, Coca-Cola, as some kind of finance executive. Consulting. What's the required internship path in consulting? One would be you start at a mid-sized consulting firm, then you get into MBB plus, so that could be also something like Monitor, Deloitte, Oliver Wyman, and so on, and then you get into McKinsey, BCG, Bain. Also here, if you have internship experience at a bulge bracket bank, if you worked at a big four company in advisory, for example, hedge fund, venture capital, consulting recruiters totally love to see that. So you could also, work at a small, let's say do your first internship at EY, next one do it at a small consulting firm that nobody's ever heard of, and then work at and then get into, let's say, Oliver Wyman, okay, and then secure a full-time offer at BCG. That's also an internship path that's possible. The process, typically they also do have brain teasers. What people obsess about is the case studies, because that's really an essential part of the interviewing process. They ask you, for example, at company XYZ, the profits went down by 10%. What happened? And then you need to arrive at an answer for that question in a very extremely structured way. And that's also the reason why I suggest to prepare that for a couple of weeks or even 1 or 2 months, because there's just a way of thinking to solving these case studies that requires a little bit of preparation. And there's tons of resources out there. Some of them are charged for pretty heavily, but there's also some free ones for the people that don't have the financial resources. What you do as a rookie, typically you build a lot of PowerPoint slides. Now, that doesn't mean you need to kind of build the slides yourself. Sometimes it's just assembling the data for the slides or making a good suggestion on how the slide could look, and then the graphics department is going to put the slide together. But it might also, contain designing these slides. You assemble data again from various databases. You interview experts and take notes. For example, for due diligence projects, there you might, as someone who's a rookie, you might be the one who's calling up a lot of experts, asking them questions about an industry that you've never heard of, and taking good notes. Also some Excel modeling, certainly less than in investment banking, and also here you have some dull tasks that you usually don't prefer to do. What do you learn? The number one thing I would say is structure. So, we also had that in investment banking, structure, but in consulting it's even more pronounced, because you really need to think every time you create a slide, or you think about processes in terms of slide design. You think about, how would I put that on a piece of paper? There's this famous concept called MISI, which comes from the McKinsey domain, which stands for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, which you can feel free to look up videos that talk about that. But it's essentially a concept that's all about structure. Diligence, also here, zero defect. Strategic and business concepts, because that's what you think about all day, essentially. And then also here, proper communication, right? Consulting is no different than investment in that they deal with a lot of very hierarchical environments. And I would say consulting firms are pretty hierarchical environments too. You will not learn how to start a company, okay? There's so many people coming to me telling me, I want to start a company at some point, but first I think it's a good idea to go into consulting. No, it's not. If you want to start a company, just freaking start a company, or work at a startup that does something similar to the company that you want to start, and gain your experience there. But consulting has nothing to do whatsoever with starting a company. It can be a good step. I mean, I started a company too and worked in consulting, but it wasn't really a result of working in consulting. It was more correlation in my case. Okay, the lifestyle you live is extremely high travel. Before COVID, that is. Now I hear that some of these consulting firms are doing a little bit less travel. But when I used to work in consulting, it was Monday to Thursday. I was always living in a hotel at the client side. Working 70 hours is not uncommon, and you have events like steering committees coming up for projects where then work really gets heavy, and we did a couple of all-nighters. So yeah, essentially you do work a lot, I would say. The pay compared to other professions here is medium. It's quite good pay, and it's getting higher because the big firms like BCG are trying to adapt to the pay level that these investment banks are offering. Usually I would say around 120,000 plus US dollar Again, in Germany, in Europe, it's going to be a little bit lower in euro terms. The exit opportunities, private equity is a very famous one because you do work a little bit less, you get the same or even more pay. You can go to clients. So I have received a couple of job offers when I used to work for clients during my consulting days. There, usually you do work a lot less and you get a little bit less pay, but the pay per hour is much better. Or startup. There's also a lot of people who go on to work in a startup or start a startup after consulting. Private equity. There's no real typical internship path because it's not very typical to get into private equity as an entry position. That's not too typical. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean it's not possible. It's I've seen that a couple of times. It does mean that it might require you to network a little bit. And what firms do private equity firms like to see on your CV as internships? It's all the same, bulge bracket, so investment banks, MBB plus, small or mid cap PE firms, of course. And important for you to know, there's these things called mega funds. So essentially Blackstone, KKR, Carlyle, Apollo. These are, really the top of the top, the biggest PE funds there are in the world. They do have a very limited hiring pool. They are just looking at a couple of guys and girls from Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, top of the class, and they typically hire them. Interview process also here includes brain teasers and some nasty questions. Typically, what you have here is you are asked to model something. So you're oftentimes asked to build an LBO model. They might also hit you with a case study, like in consulting, and you have personal FET. Also here, same as in consulting, I would say it takes a little bit more preparation time. So factor in a couple of weeks or 1 or 2 months. What you do as a rookie is a lot of PowerPoint slide building. Essentially, it's a mixture of what you do at investment banks and what you do in consulting. So it's kind of best or worst of both worlds. So you do a lot of PowerPoint slides, Excel modeling, you assemble data from various databases, but you also do interview some experts, take notes, and have some dull tasks. Really, I think this describes it quite well. It's a good mixture between consulting and investment banking. What you learn, here we have it, best of both worlds. You learn diligence, financial concepts, but also strategic and business thinking, because you don't just deal with the finance. You don't just think about how can we finance this leveraged buyout, for example, but you also think about, okay, once we bought this company, how do we turn it around? How do we make it more profitable? And that's when your consultant mind kind of kicks in and you think about the strategies, how to turn around this company. Structure and communication. The lifestyle you live is moderate travel, a bit more than in investment banking in most cases, and 70 hours or so. You have times where you're closing deals, so then it gets much more busy, and PE associates then often moan that it's super tough times, usually around 70 hours or less. Pay medium, similar to consulting. As a rookie, you don't really get carry. So carry is kind of like think of it as a bonus when you work on a project, and you get a certain amount, a certain percentage of the deal value. There's different ways private equity firms pay that out to employees, but it doesn't matter anyways, because as a very young guy, you're not going to get any of that. It is, however, a big part of compensation once you get into the higher seniority levels. So overall comparable to consulting, exit opportunities, portfolio companies is a very typical one, because as a PE fund, you acquire companies, right? And you work with these companies in the long term. So it's very common that some of the people working in PE funds start working at some of these portfolio companies. So you also have some people switching to consulting or banking, even though that's less typical, starting startups, or just switching to other PE funds from time to time. Venture capital. What's the required internship path? This also is less typical. It's not a very typical entry position to enter into venture capital, but again, it's possible. Networking would be a good idea. What do they like to see? I would say a large startup, so something where that's not at the siege stage, but something that's going to evolve into something unicorn level, and that's well known in your country. If you can secure an internship there, very well. Investment banking, they like it too, especially big VC funds like Sequoia. They love to hire investment banking analysts, because they know, okay, these people know how to crunch the data, and now we're just going to teach them a little bit about the startup world, and then we should be fine. Consulting. Or, of course, the best way would be to start a startup and receive investments. These people often end up to get a job at some point on the other side of the deal table, because the VC funds know this guy, he has received investment, he kind of knows how it works, he has seen the process from the startup side of the table. Now, why don't we give him an offer and see how he performs on the VC side of the table? The interview process is a little bit of all over the place. You have these brain teasers. You also have them asking you valuation knowledge. How would you value this startup? A lot of questions about industries, technologies, portfolio startups. So make sure to read up on that. If it's a biotech VC fund, for sure they are going to ask you questions about the biotech industry, what you think about it, what are some hot companies and startups you see in this sector. And on that note, also some milder case studies might pop up. I've seen those from time to time, but they are less demanding usually than in consulting. Preparation, a couple of weeks. What do you do there as a rookie? Again, also here you need to, fall in love with building PowerPoint slides, and here you don't have a graphics department that does them for you. You do spend quite a bit of time on Excel, doing valuations, crunching startups, data. But, and that's a very nice side of the job, is you need to get up to speed on different startups and technologies very often. You do also need to attend conferences, and networking is kind of part of your job description in many cases. If you're someone like a deal flow associate, your job is to get deal flow to the VC fund. So you are going to go to one or the other event, maybe even speak there at some point. And then also here you interview experts and you take notes. What you learn, that depends on the size of the fund. You have these very big funds, if you're at Sequoia, for example, where you are going to learn more financial knowledge, where your task as an analyst is very narrow and going to be more focused on Excel modeling. Whereas if you're in a very small fund, you very well might do more holistic things during your job. So it depends a lot on the size. But generally, of course, you will get to know the world of VC, which can be a very exciting one. You'll have a lot of startup knowledge. How do these startups start out? What makes a successful startup and an unsuccessful one? You also will learn a lot of very deep technical knowledge about different technical domains, and some high-level financial concepts, which of course will be much more high level than if you go into investment banking, for example, where you're literally doing nothing else. What lifestyle you live? Travel is quite low. Working, I would say around 60 hours. Of course, that also depends a lot on the fund. Pay is low comparably and you don't really get any carry or any bonuses like that. So pay compared to, let's say, consulting, private equity, and investment banking is definitely going to be lower. And the exit opportunities are also here. Portfolio companies, much more common than in private equity. People end up leaving for some of the portfolio companies, but also innovation departments and big corporates, corporate venture capital departments. And I would say this is the most common here in this industry, to start your own startup, because you see so many great ideas, so many great startups, that at some point you say, okay, let me just try for myself. Big tech. Here, the required internship path, it really depends on your projects. If we're talking about becoming a software engineer at big tech, it matters what you built in the past. Did you build a nice app, a cool website, a cool marketplace? But of course, they also do like seeing other tech firms on your resume in your internships. Stuff like hedge funds, banks, you worked in a quant department, Citadel, something like that. And startups of a certain size, so not the super small 5 people startup, but again, we're talking about unicorn level startups that are well known in your country, for example. Interview process, technical questions, personal fit, preparation, couple of weeks or months ideally. Of course, this year now depends a lot on whether you're applying to be on the business side of things, or you're applying to be on the technical side of things. And that's why we're going to shorten it a little bit. Also, what you learn depends on that. Lifestyle you live is quite low travel. It can be very chill, doesn't really depend on whether you're on the business or engineering side of things. Can be pretty chill. About how people on Google love the little peaks and perks that they get at their job. Pay is medium. So 120,000 US dollar plus. You have these things called restricted stock units, RSUs. Basically, you get some stock in this big tech company that you work for, which usually vests over a couple of years, 3 or 4 years. All in all, I would say the pay level is a little bit low. If you take all things together, it would be a little bit lower than investment banking, and it would be very comparable to consulting. Obviously, you earn more as an engineer as if you work on the business side, even though the business side also offers attractive opportunities in big tech firms, like, for example, product management. Exit opportunities are all over the place. Could be finance, could be startup. A lot of startup, actually, a lot of people leave and start their own startup, because you have a lot of people who love startups in big tech firms, as well as some boring industry job. Startup. I think that's the last one. Startup, there's no typical path. But in general, startup hiring managers, they like to see everything that we just discussed. Bulge bracket, MBB plus, PEs, other startups, VCs. The interview process is also, can be super different. Is always related to the position. So if it's product management, they will ask you a lot of technical questions about the product, how you would design certain interactions with the user. If it's business development, they will ask you, how do you get us clients, and so on. So here, I did a couple of startup interviews when I was young. I never prepared very long, and usually worked out okay-ish. Okay, that doesn't mean it's easy. You do need to prepare. But it's definitely, I would say, easier than preparing for big tech engineering and interviews, or consulting case study interviews. What do you do as a rookie? Of course, that also depends heavily on the role. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview of what are the different roles in startups. Okay, you have BD and growth. Basically, you're trying to get clients for the startup. So that can be B2B or B2C. Operations. you're essentially trying to keep the startup running. Engineering development, of course, you're developing. Chief of staff is also a nice role. You are the assistant to the CEO. You're making sure things run correctly within the team. And product management, you are the person concerned with the product. You're bridging the engineers, the designers, the people who are the marketeers, who are talking to the customers, and making sure all of those parties agree on how this product should look like. What you learn depends on all of these roles. BD, of course, it's a lot of sales. Ops, you learn a lot of diligence, structure. Engineering development, well, that's clear. Chief of staff can be a little bit like consulting sometimes. A lot of organization, strategic thinking here and there, creating slides, structure, diligence. Product management, you learn a lot to coordinate parties, think about products, and it can be a great career path itself, product management. What lifestyle you live. Travel will be most of the times pretty low. Sometimes you have roles in BD or growth that require extensive travel, but most of the time it's quite low. And working hours depend. There are startups that are extremely chill. You work 40, 50 hours. There are startups that go absolutely apeshit crazy, work 80, 90 hours. I worked at one startup in Australia for an internship, and I slept in the office a couple of times because it was just so demanding. But it was also cool, it's a young team, everybody's hungry, or everybody's going after it. So it was a fun time. Pay is low, okay? So don't expect to be paid a lot in a startup. It's definitely the lowest if you compare it to PE, big tech, and so on. But, and that's the attractive thing, sometimes you can get equity. Now, sometimes that will be something like, okay, we don't give you equity now, but we can give you equity in 2 years or so. You need to think about that yourself, if that's worth it, if you believe them, if you can secure that offer somehow. And it also depends on the size of the startup. If it's very small and you're just 10 people, then for sure you should get something of the pie. If it's already 1,000 people, that's a totally different story. Exit opportunities, VC, especially if it's one startup that turns out to be successful, that grows quickly, then you have great exit opportunities into VC. Tech is also a common one, and building your own startup. Essentially, if you want to build your own startup, working at a startup first, at a high growth startup, ideally that's gotten some funding where every day something blows up, you need to fix it, and then your revenue doubles week by week. That's the best preparation to starting your own startup, essentially. How to reach a net worth of $1 million before 30 or 35. Well, let's talk about that. In my estimation, there's a couple of pillars that you need to get right, and then it's extremely reasonable to have a net worth of 1 million by 30. And everybody can do it, provided that you watch this video early enough, okay? If you watch it when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, no problem, okay? If you watch it when you're in your 30s, you need to add another 5 to 10 years to that. And what it comes down to is primarily you have a couple of pillars. Those are 3. You have a career, a side business, and you need to invest well. What about the career? There's a couple of careers that lend themselves to becoming a higher net worth individual at some point. And the first thing that I think is important to think about is there's something that's a normal career, there's something that's a participating career, and there's something that's a business. A career is you work in consulting, you get a little bonus at the end of the year, and whether you do a good job or you do a bad job doesn't really matter. It matters on the margins because your bonus will be 5% higher, but who gives a damn about those 5,000 or 10,000 or 15,000 bucks? Nobody. It's not going to put you into a different income bracket. A participating career, however, will enable you to participate in the value that you generate. One very simple example is sales. If you do a sales job, usually you're paid a commission. So the more you sell, the more you earn. And that's something for people that have this hustle mentality, that know where they want to go, that are willing to work hard. You guys need to get into a participating career. What are participating careers? And then you have thirdly, it's business, right? So you're an entrepreneur essentially. You are leveraging capital or humans to build something great, okay? So participating career. What are participating careers? I would say there's 3.5. Finance, sales, tech startup, and consulting. Finance. Hedge funds, private equity, investment banking, equity research, asset management. These are all careers where you have a very big bonus component plus a carry component in some cases at some point, okay? So, private equity, you will get some carry if you work in this profession for 5 to 10 years. You will be at a position where your carry is a very solid 6-figure number that you receive because you did a successful deal. That's exactly what we want to have because we created millions of value for our fund. Why shouldn't we profit from that in some way? In an investment banking, you have a very high bonus component that gets also very high at some point, and so that's kind of the instrument that we have in finance. It's either carry or it's a very big fat bonus paired with a quite decent base payment. As we saw investment banking, you get if you compare investment banking to the other professions, you will go home with the highest amount of payment salary on a junior level. Sales, great, because you have a commission component. So if you work in B2B sales, you sell extremely expensive software licenses to other companies, and you are doing well, you are getting paid very well. That's exactly what we want. Tech startup, we just heard about it. If you join a startup, you have this equity component. That's what we want. After 2 years or so, you're usually seeing where this company is going. If you're not raising any more money, you are going extremely slow. Okay, my equity is probably not going to be worth anything, so you quickly switch the startup. RSUs, the restricted stock units, also very attractive in tech firms, especially if you manage to get in very early, sometimes even pre-IPO. These RSUs, they can literally be worth millions. And that's what we want. Revenue shares in some cases also you can secure from businesses, but it's less common for startups. And consulting, why is it in brackets? Well, in consulting, the bonus component is not as high as in investment banking, for example. So you have less of that, and you do have a personal success component, but that usually only kicks in once you're at the principal or partner level. And once you're at that level, you're like 10 years into your career, which is a little bit late. So consulting is the kind of career that I personally would work at for a couple of years, 3 years, 4, 5 years maximum, and then try to get out and do something differently. Like, for example, me, who oriented himself more into this venture capital direction, because at some point it's just too much work with too little pay. So that's the first pillar. You want to have that in place, a participating career. Now, no matter what you work, okay, if it's in big tech or it's in investment banking, you will have time for something more, okay? You have the weekends, you have the nights, so there's no excuse not to build a small side venture on the side. What could that be? Well, I mean, there's 1,000 opportunities out there. Usually, though, you should think about something that's close to what you're already doing. So don't think about, building something in the biotech space that has nothing to do with what you're doing right now. Think about close to the core. And one great tip I can give you is go to flipper.com. That's a website where people can sell their businesses. And usually it's not, billion-dollar businesses, but it's some kind of online businesses that you can sell for 50K, 100K, 500K. Just go online and see what are people building. Shopify apps, Amazon FBA businesses, forums, platforms, and so on. And the third pillar is investing. Now, if you do things correctly, you can save 80%. You can have a save rate of 80 or 70%, okay? You put some money into your apartment. Let's say, you put some of this money that you earn in your participating career into your apartment. What do you do with the rest? You're going to start buying Lamborghinis and expensive clothes already? No, you should put it right into the investing bucket. And what that does, suddenly you have three major income sources, okay? You have your participating career that's going to be the strongest in the first 1 or 2 years. Hopefully, after 2 or 3 years, you have established some kind of side business that's earning you as much money as your participating career, and you're dumping all of that money into investing. And you can be super conservative. Just buy a couple of ETFs, buy a couple of stocks that you think, will provide you with dividends for the rest of your life. Me personally, I would dabble around in crypto. At this point, with a market cap of 2 trillion or so, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the total equities out there, which is around 100 trillion. So I do think the market is going to go up, but that's your personal choice, But essentially, it's these three pillars. With the nice thing that this side business gives you some exit optionality. So at some point, you might want to get rid of this thing. But then, if you assume a reasonable multiple on your side business, you can sell this side business. And if you just sell it for 500,000, well, maybe you'll be able to sell it for 1, 2, 3 million. That gives you great liquidity for your next step, which could be whatever you fancy. There are some secondary pillars that I advocate for. I have never seen anyone who's ambitious about his body and about his personal fitness that didn't get far in life in some shape or form. Now, mind you, getting far, it always depends on where you start, right? But what I'm saying is, don't be that guy who becomes successful and looks like complete crap, is stuck in a body that he cannot enjoy anymore with all the money he has. Try to be the Adonis that gets his career right, but also gets his fitness and his body right. Mens sana in corpore sano, as the Romans say, so have a healthy mind and a healthy body. Specialization is extremely important, but I wouldn't. So generally you can be three things. You can be an extreme generalist, so you know nothing about everything essentially, okay? That's what you become if you work in, let's say, consulting for too long. You can be a specialist, so you can be among the top 1% in, let's say, programming. These people usually would be referred to as nerds because they just know this one thing and they really can't relate to anything else. What you want to be as a polymath, that's the third degree, the third option is you have 3, 4, 5 things where you are, let's say, in the top 10%. So where, you're not a super expert, a world expert in anything, but you are among the top 10% in multiple areas. And this, gives you expert status. Yes, there's a couple of people who know more about this area, but who cares? You know a lot. At the same time, it teaches you management because you're able to jump between these different areas and you'll be able to act in a managerial position. You are essentially manager material. Geo-diversification. Diversify your career in a geostrategic way. Don't just work in the US your whole life. Why don't you try living in London for a couple of years? Why don't you go to China for a couple of years? Southeast Asia, Africa. There's so many interesting markets, and working in a different location for some time gives you so much optionality just because of all the people you meet there, the country-specific expertise you build. It's unfathomable. And going to China was one of the best decisions in my life in that regard. Lastly, networking. Already touched upon this a couple of times. We also read that for jobs like venture capital or private equity, if you want to do that first thing out of university, is really difficult. So if you build a network, that is one of the best things that will get you into these jobs. Plus, as a young person, you have a very easy time networking because other people don't see you as competitors. They essentially see you as a young lad that they are happy to support, because you're just too young to be a competitor for them in any shape, way, or form. How to become a billionaire. Now, first let's make something clear. Becoming a billionaire is a whole other challenge than getting to a 7 or 8 digit net worth. So you can plan predictably. I want to have a net worth of 30 million at some point. Quite predictably. You cannot plan to have a net worth of 3 billion US dollar at some point. Essentially, that's because the element of luck does play a little bit of a role, but that shouldn't be an excuse. What's the number one way to get to such an enormous net worth? It's always going to be via equity. There's no way you get there in any other way, because equity is just the most scalable thing. Okay, so does that mean everybody needs to start a company? No. There's people who became billionaires by being an early employee. One example that I talked about on this channel is Chamath Palihapitiya. This guy essentially became a billionaire by joining Facebook very early on. Now you can ask yourself, where are the odds higher if you start your own thing and it becomes worth a couple of billions? So you owning, let's say, 10%, 15% of this company at this point are worth $1 billion, or is it joining a company? I would say both are pretty freaking hard. And above all, the market element plays a much bigger role. It's not about only the idea anymore, but the whole industry. The whole industry needs to be a massively expanding industry, so that you have the industry component, you have the product component, so your idea essentially, and you have the team component that all work together in a way that this thing becomes a unicorn or a decacorn to give you a sufficient equity at some point. Now, the last thing I want to say about this is we had this luck component, right? Of course, luck plays a role. But it's also about putting yourself into a situation where you are able to be lucky. And if you want to break this billion net worth barrier, you just need to try so much harder to be in the right situations to be lucky. And most people don't try hard enough. So that's all I can say. It's really it's really about trying to be in these situations, trying to surround yourself with people, for example, where you know, okay, for example, being with these kind of people could at least give me a shot to at some point start a business with them together. And I know if I would start a business with this person, this would become a huge business, so it will be extremely successful. So let me try to, spend more time with this person. Many people don't push that far. And then, of course, you need to be lucky in some sense that, essentially you're at the right place at the right time. But just pushing for that is an important step, okay? So essentially, I don't know how to become a billionaire myself. There's no step-for-step plan. But knowing about these things and pushing into this direction, I think is the first step for all of us. And then, of course, we're trying to figure out how to become a billionaire in our Patreon community on Discord every single day. Best industries to work in the long term. Let's finish it up with this one. My favorite industries with billion-dollar potential. I do think I mentioned that this industry component plays a much bigger role when we talk about getting to a billion-dollar net worth. And some industries I like that I also discussed in a prior video: Web3, private credit, space industry, and sustainability. These four industries offer so much potential alone. They are going to be industries that are massive, where it's pretty clear that anyone who's active in this industry and who builds something successful, which of course is just going to be 1% of the people building something in that industry, is probably going to build a billion-dollar company. Also, what I like personally is fintech, biotech, and AI. Of course, AI is super broad. But these are the industries where I see a lot of potential. If you want to dig deeper into those, make sure to check out the one video I did about industries that will create the next billionaires. And with that, we're at the end of the presentation. Parandum, by the way, is a company of mine. I don't know why we used the presentation template of Parandum here. I hope that helps. This is something I would have loved to have myself when I started out, constructing my career essentially 11 years ago or so. I'm pretty sure it will help some of you. If it did, let me know in the comments below. If you're looking for someone to guide you, we do have a Patreon community where it's all about this, master planning our careers. There's literally a channel called Master Planning in the Discord group. So feel free to join. Apart from that, leave some comments. Let me know what you think. And stay hungry, stay ambitious, and stay childish, as we discussed. Bye-bye.